The rain on the corrugated iron roof isn't a drumbeat. It is a drip, drip, drip that sinks with the ache behind my eyes. Watery moonlight bleeds through the high, grimy window of my shed, painting the damp earth outside in shades of bruised violet and shadow black. I knee. Deep in my hives, the usual comforting drone of bees, a low thrum against my chest. When the sky trembled, see the sequence. Not in the sky, but fiddy inside my vision. 7 to 3 negative 9 negative 1. A cold, precise pattern like the pheromone pulse of a hive in terminal distress. My beekeeping intuition, usually a warm certainty, flares into a jagged spike of wrongness. For not natural. Not random. Asterisk, the pattern pulses behind my eyelids, each number a tiny cold star. I fumble for my journal, the leather cover slick under my damp fingers. The rain intensifies, hammering the roof with a sharper fervent thwack. 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 Mixing with the frantic buzzing of the hives. But the bees aren't buzzing for I too. They rearranging a sudden, violent shift. A wave of them, thousands of them, surges sivant around me, not attacking, but herding puid. Their wings create a sound like tearing silk, a high-pitched fifinity that cuts through the rain. They form a living corridor, pushing me, forcing me towards the skeletal silhouette of the vast archive skyscraper, its windows dark voids against the bruised sky. The rain stings my face, cold and relentless, each drop a tiny needle. My breath comes in ragged gasps, the familiar scent of beeswax and damp wood, suddenly cloying, nauseating. The reflection in the rain, streaked window wavers Cindy for a split second. I see elongated, distorted figures standing behind me. Their limbs too long, their faces blurred smears of shadow. For mirrors lie. I think desperately for it's the rain, the moonlight. But the fear is real, a cold stone in my gut. The bees hum, usually a grounding vibration, sharpens into a painful discordant whine. My throat closes, thick with the taste of copper and panic. I see the cat Mimir, perched on the shed's edge. Its fur, usually a deep, quiet black, seems to hum with a low, resonant thrum beneath my ribs, amplifying the dread into a physical pressure. 14 amplifier, the thought flashes, sharp and cold. It's not just the bees, the foy pattern. It's calling. The vast archive looms, a monolith of forgotten data and forgotten sorrow. I can feel the weight of it, a cold pressure against my temples, like the ghost of a childhood wound I buried decades ago. Not a storm, I realize with a surge of fury that burns hotter than the fear, but a reckoning. The burden of unresolved sorrow isn't just a theme, it's the air I breathe now, thick and suffocating. I take a stumbling step towards the archive, the rain plastering my shirt to my skin, the sound of the downpour a constant, drowning roar. The bees surge forward, their frantic buzz a single high-pitched note. The world narrows to the cold rain, the unnatural silence of the archive, the crushing weight of the pattern in my head. My hand brushes the journal, its pages slick. The bees hum reaches a fever pitch, a sound that vibrates in my teeth, a sound that feels like the very fabric of my being is straining. Then, as the first tear cuts through the rain on my cheek, the sound doesn't fade. It shatters it. The frantic, buzzing hum dissolves into a single sharp, tearing fuddy of fabric, loud and final. Echoing in the sudden, terrible quiet of the rain. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the downpour. The bees had vanished, their living corridor dissolved as abruptly as it formed. I stumbled through the archive's revolving doors, the mechanism groaning like a dying beast. The air inside was thick, stagnant, tasting of dust and something else, something metallic and vaguely floral, like pressed flowers left to rot. Mimir materialized beside me, a silent black shadow against the pale, decaying grandeur. Its fur vibrated against my leg, a low, resonant hum that resonated deep within my bones, amplifying the tremor in my hands. The corridors were a labyrinth of forgotten data, the walls lined with rows upon rows of obsolete tapes. And there they were. Labels. Each one scrawled with the same numbers that had haunted my vision. 7 to 3 negative 9 negative 1. The lettering was faded, almost illegible, but the sequence burned into my memory. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold, brittle plastic. A wave of dizziness washed over me. A sudden rush of heat behind my eyes. The air thrummed, not with the familiar drone of bees, but with something else entirely, a low, guttural resonance that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It was a chorus of forgotten languages, a cacophony of whispers just beyond the threshold of comprehension. Mimir, hum intensified, a physical pressure against my chest, a temvati amplifier. Asterisk, I thought, the word a cold shard of logic in the rising tide of disorientation. I moved deeper into the corridor, drawn by an unseen force. The floor groaned under my weight, a mournful sigh that echoed through the cavernous space. I found a terminal, coated in a thick layer of dust. It flickered to life with a jolt, the screen displaying a cascade of archaic code then, a chat log. The broadcast is singing again. The text pulsed with a sickly green light. It hungers for sequence. The words resonated with a chilling familiarity, family sequence. Asterisk, the numbers, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the archive. Oppressive silence. Another message appeared. Initiating phase 2, I noticed a bell hanging from a rusted chain near the terminal, tarnished, almost black with age. I reached out, hesitantly, and touched it. A single, mournful tone echoed through the corridor, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my very marrow. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the sound of loss, of regret, of something profoundly, irreparably broken. The cat, purrs coalesced, forming words in my mind, not spoken aloud, but felt. Fragments of memories not my own. Images of faces never seen, places never been. A child's laughter, abruptly cut short. A woman weeping. The terminal screen shifted, displaying another message, synchronizing audio feed. The archive seemed to breathe, the hum intensifying, the whispers growing louder. Mimir's hum deepened, a resonating pulse that synchronized with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. It wasn't just amplifying my fear. It was feeding it. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing myself from a distance, a puppet dancing to a tune I could hear. Wonder bloomed in my chest, not the gentle curiosity of a beekeeper observing a hive, but a sharp, piercing wonder laced with a profound and unsettling dread. It felt like standing on the precipice of something immense, something ancient, something terrible. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger. The numbers, 7 to 3, -9, -1, flashed behind my eyelids, a relentless pulsing rhythm. The bell's mournful tone seemed to burrow into my skull, amplifying the whispers, the memories, the dread. Then, the terminal displayed a final message, stark and undeniable against the flickering green screen. Subroutine Kowalski activated. The cat's purr deepened, perfectly synced with the frantic hammering beat of my heart. The chat log pulsed, the green glow casting jagged shadows across my trembling fingers. Asterisk, the construct is a child. Drowning, a memory given teeth. Asterisk, the words rearranged themselves in my skull, syllables dissolving like sugar in rainwater. I exhaled, and my breath fogged the cracked mirror hanging from the terminal. Rusted armature. It had been here when I arrived. No, not Tweedy here. But in the space between the corridors, a threshold the archive had always refused to acknowledge. Now it was mine. The glass was pitted with age, its silvered surface warped into something concave, a well of distorted light. My reflection wasn't just stretched, it was sunrung elongated, the angles of my face pulled taut like a drowned man. Skin. The hum from Mimir's fur vibrated against my collarbone, a subsonic throb that made my teeth ache. I reached out, fingers hovering over the glass. The air between us rippled, not with heat, but with something heavier, something that smelled of wet wool and copper. Then the mirror breath died. A wet whelch echoed from its depths, the sound of something dragging itself free from the dark. My reflection twisted, fingers elongating into something too long, too jointed, the edges of its body fraying like fabric in a storm. The shadows beneath its skin pulsed, black veins spreading like ink in water. I recoiled, but the reflection mimicked the movement, its mouth stretching into a silent scream. The hum from Mimir's fur sharpened, a discordant note that sliced through my skull. Asterisk it's feeding on the fear. Asterisk I realized, voice raw in my throat. The chat log had said the construct was born from drowning. But this was worse. This was the feeding on the frowning. The way water clings to the lungs, the way the body remembers the weight of the dark. My reflection lunged forward, and I stumbled back, my heel catching on something unseen. The terminal screen flared, casting the mirror in a sickly purple light, the color of bruises under old skin. I touched the glass. The moment my fingers made contact, the mirror screamed. Not a sound, but a sensation, a pressure against my eardrums that made my bones vibrate. The reflection shattered inward, not outward, the glass dissolving like sugar in water. For a heartbeat, there was only the wet the squelch of something drowning, the sound of fabric tearing as the archive itself unraveled. Then the mirror was gone, replaced by a corridor I hadn't seen before. The air in the new space was thick with the scent of ozone and old blood. The walls were lined with glowing symbols, each one a jagged fracture of light, pulsing in the same rhythm as the numbers in my head. Asterisk 7 to 3 negative 9 negative 1 asterisk. The symbols matched the sequence, but they weren't just numbers. They were footwind. Wounds, the light bleeding from them in slow, wet pulses. Mimir, Esfer vibrated against my leg, the hum now, a physical force, pressing against my ribs like a hand. I stepped forward, the soles of my boots sticking to the floor. The symbols glowed brighter, their light reflecting off the shards of glass at my feet. They weren't random. They were arranged in a pattern. The same sequence, the same hunger. The shards trembled, then shifted, the edges of the glass aligning themselves into the numbers, each digit a jagged, bleeding line. The wet sequelch of the mirror, as reflection filled my ears again, louder now. Closer, the sound of something rising from the dark. The symbols flared, and the sequence burned into my vision. Asterisk 7 to 3 negative 9 negative 1 asterisk. The numbers dissolving into the shape of a face. My face, but older, drowned. The mouth open in a silent scream. The shards of glass vibrated beneath my fingers, the edges sharp enough to draw blood. The archive was breathing again, and this time, it wasn't just feeding on my fear. It was feeding on ficking me. The numbers, asterisk 7 to 3 negative 9 negative 1 asterisk, burned behind my eyelids, a phantom afterimage overlaid on the pulsing symbols. The corridor stretched before me, a wound in the archive. S architecture. Mimir, as hum pressed against my ribs, a physical weight that stole the air from my lungs. Each step I took felt deliberate, measured, as if the floor itself were resisting my passage. The scent of ozone and old blood intensified, clinging to the back of my throat like a bitter taste. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a tarnished metal cylinder, tape reels. As I drew closer, a sound began to bleed from them. Faint at first, then growing in intensity, children. Sus voices, not laughter, not games, but the plaintive, echoing cries of children lost and afraid. Mama left the light on. The words were fragmented, distorted, as if filtered through layers of static and sorrow. The rain thundered against something unseen, a corrugated iron roof perhaps, the sound resonating within the archive, metal bones. Mimir nudged my leg, a silent urging. I moved deeper, the voices coalescing into a chorus of fragmented pleas. Don't, go. One whispered. He's coming, another sobbed. The shadows danced on the walls, mimicking my movements, elongated and distorted, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Each footfall sent a shudder through the floor, accompanied by a sharp thuripi, the sound of fabric tearing under immense strain. It wasn't just the sound of fabric. It was the feeling of it, the sensation of something being pulled apart. I reached for a reel, the metal cold and slick beneath my fingers. As I pulled it from its housing, a log scrolled across the wall beside it, shimmering into existence as if conjured from the very air. The construct is not a thing, it is a memory loop. The words felt like a physical blow, a sudden, sickening realization. The archive wasn't just containing the construct. It was the construct, a repository of forgotten grief, a labyrinth of sorrow. The hum from Mimir escalated, a high-pitched whine that drilled into my skull. I tasted copper, a metallic tang that coated my tongue, a phantom taste of blood. The shadows deepened, swirling around me like a suffocating shroud. I could feel eyes on me, unseen observers lurking in the periphery, their presence a palpable weight on my skin. The children's voices intensified, layering over each other in a cacophony of despair. Room after room unfolded, each a tableau of childhood sorrow. A little girl crying over a broken doll, a boy hiding under a bed, his face pale with terror. A family gathered around a table, their faces etched with a profound sadness that seemed to defy time. The shadows mirrored my every step, mimicking my movements with unsettling precision. Each footfall echoed with a sickening fruity, the sound growing louder, more insistent. It was the sound of my own unraveling. the sound of my memories being torn apart. Another log appeared on the wall, colder than the last. Sequence 7 to 3 -9 -1 triggers resonant cascade. My head throbbed, the numbers pressing against my temples. I felt a dizzying wave of disorientation, a sense of being adrift in a sea of fragmented memories. The children's voices began to merge, forming a single, unified voice. My voice. Why didn't you save me? The words were a whisper at first, then growing in intensity, echoing through the corridor. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing there. Only the shadows, the children's voices, and the relentless hum of Mimir's fur. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and despair. The rain slapped against the unseen roof, a relentless, rhythmic pounding. A section of the wall slid inward, revealing another corridor, darker and more oppressive than the last. I hesitated, the children's voice repeating in my head, "Why didn't you save me?" Mimir pressed against my leg, a silent command. I took a step forward, then another, drawn into the darkness. As I did, a section of the wall behind me began to close, the mechanism a slow, grinding scrape. I turned to see a heavy metal door sliding shut, sealing me within the archive's embrace. The children's voice swelled, a mournful chorus echoing in the confined space. "Why didn't you save me?" The deep purple light pulsed, a sickly heartbeat against the corroded metal of the server room. It wasn't illumination, not really. It was a presence, a weight pressing against my eyelids, making the numbers 7 to 3 -9 -1 swim in my vision. The air tasted of burnt circuits and something else, something acrid and vaguely floral, like decaying orchids. Mimir's hum resonated, no longer a comforting weight but a frantic vibration against my ribs, syncing with the rhythmic throb of the light. "I am not a subroutine," I muttered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The archive hadn't been a repository. It was a broadcast station. Each reel, each log, wasn't a record of sorrow, but a line of code. A programmed response. My memories. The scent of honey on my hands, the precise angle of the star pattern against the twilight sky, the crushing weight of my wife's absence. They weren't mine. They were Shridata. Encoded, triggered. The cat's purr intensified, a low, guttural rumble that intertwined with the server. As hum, it wasn't a comforting sound anymore. It felt like a tuning fork, vibrating my very bones. I felt a surge of fury, a raw, primal rage that threatened to shatter the fragile shell of my composure. It wasn't directed at anything specific, just a generalized, overwhelming resentment at the artificiality of my existence. I reached for a terminal, the cold metal slick beneath my fingertips. The surface was covered in a layer of grime, a film of dust that clung to my skin. As my hand made contact, the room began to vibrate, a low, resonant hum that built in intensity. The deep purple light pulsed faster, brighter, reflecting in the polished metal of the servers. The children's voices, once fragmented and mournful, coalesced into a single, distorted chorus. Not real. Not real. My memories began to unravel, not in a chaotic rush, but in a slow, agonizing cascade. The image of my wife's face flickered, replaced by a string of binary code. The scent of honey morphed into the metallic tang of ozone. The star pattern fractured into a series of numerical sequences. The floor trembled beneath my feet, a low, persistent vibration that resonated through my bones. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being pulled apart, revealing the cold, sterile machinery beneath. Mimir's fur began to glow, a sickly deep purple mirroring the light of the servers. His purr deepened, locking into a perfect synchronization with the room. As hum, it felt invasive, as if he were probing my mind, extracting my thoughts, my memories, my very essence. I recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over me. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something synthetic and unsettling. "Breaking free," I whispered, the words escaping my lips before I could consciously form them. The terminal flashed, a string of text scrolling across the screen. "Breaking free, 99%, 98%. Each percentage point felt like a jolt of electricity, a surge of power coursing through my veins. The children's voices faded, replaced by a rising mechanical whine. The room's vibrations intensified, threatening to tear me apart. The deep purple light pulsed one final time, then abruptly ceased. The hum of the servers reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that filled my ears. I staggered backward, clutching my head, as the cat's fur pulsed with an unnatural, ethereal glow. The feeling of being trapped, of being controlled, began to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of agency, of self-determination. The floor flea-bucked beneath me, a violent shudder that sent me sprawling. Breaking free, 97%, 96%. The numbers continued to scroll, each one a step closer to, what? Freedom? Or something far more terrifying? I didn't know. All I knew was that the world was shifting, changing, and that I was somehow impossibly at the center of it all. The first mirror was a blade of obsidian, its surface so black it drank the dim purple light. My breath fogged the glass, not with moisture but with static, tiny sparks clinging like dust to the surface. I exhaled again, and the reflection didn't breathe back. It stood there, drowning, its mouth open in a silent scream beneath the corrugated iron roof, as relentless as squeaky. The rain had shifted, no longer a murmur but a jagged, high, pitched wail, as if the sky itself were unraveling. The reflection's fingers twitched, waterlogged and gray, reaching for something just out of frame. My pulse hammered against my ribs, syncing with the cat's purr, low and resonant, vibrating through the soles of my feet. I stepped forward. The second mirror showed me smiling, but the grin split too wide, the edges of my mouth peeling back like wet paper. The reflection's teeth were too many, too sharp, and when I reached out, my fingers passed through the glass as if it were smoke. The scree of the rain twisted into a laughter, thin and breaking, like the sound of a record skipping. The cat's hum deepened, a counterpoint to the distortion, and for a second I thought I heard words beneath it. Ignore it, 20, let it go. But the voice was my own, fractured and distant. I turned. The third mirror was the worst. It showed me as I had been years ago, younger, smaller, standing in a field of wildflowers under a sky streaked with the same sickly purple. The reflection's hands weren't reaching for me. They were reaching through me, cold and wet, gripping my wrist with a strength that didn't belong to a child. The scree of the rain became a sob, a raw animal sound, and the reflection's mouth moved, whispering something I could hear over the pulse in my ears. The cat's purr locked onto my bones, a tuning fork set to foot shatter. I lunged. The glass didn't break. I did. My younger self's fingers closed around my throat, not squeezing, not yet. But the pressure was there, a promise. The rain's scree became a scream, and the mirror surface rippled like water, distorting into a corridor of symbols. They pulsed in time with my heartbeat, glowing faintly in the purple dark, *7 to 3, -9, -1, *. The cat's hum rose into a wail, and the reflection's grip tightened. The mirror shattered, not outward, inward. The fragments weren't glass, they were sui dorsi, each one a sliver of black mirror leading into the corridor. The symbols on the walls pulsed faster, brighter, spelling themselves out in the dim light. Sure sorrow is the key. The rain's scree became a chorus, 100 voices overlapping, drowning out the cat's purr. My younger self was gone. The reflection was gone. There was only the corridor, the symbols, and the weight of fingers, still pressed against my skin. Not mine. The symbols flared, and the door at the end of the hall opened. The doors slammed shut behind me, not with a click, but a sigh of displaced air. The corridor vanished. I stood in a chamber. The air hung thick and stagnant, tasting of dust and something else, something sickly sweet like overripe fruit left to rot. Moonlight, fractured and watery, filtered through unseen vents, illuminating a scene that twisted my gut. Toys. Hundreds of them. Rag dolls with vacant eyes, tin soldiers rusted and slumped, wooden horses with chipped paint, all floating in a pool of dark, still water. The surface barely rippled, reflecting the distorted shapes of the room above. The cat padded ahead, its fur emitting that low, resonant hum-sewer vibration that seemed to burrow into my bones, amplifying the tremor in my hands. For fabric ripping. The sound echoed, not from a tear, but from the very air itself, as if the reality around me were fraying at the edges. Ahead, shapes coalesced from the shadows. Elongated figures, impossibly tall and thin, their limbs bending at unnatural angles. They wept silently, tears tracing paths through the grime on their faces. My mother, my father, faces I hadn't consciously recalled in decades, yet recognized with a sickening certainty. Each step forward brought another fabric-ripping sound, a visceral protest against my progress. The cat's hum intensified, a pressure against my skull, urging me onward. "They are all loops," a voice echoed, not from the room but from inside my head. "You are the anomaly." The words felt like ice shards lodging in my throat. I wanted to turn back to claw my way through the shattered mirror, but something, that insistent hum, that unseen force, held me captive. The water lapped against my boots, cold and clinging. The figures swayed, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by an unseen hand. My mother's face, a mask of perpetual disappointment, swam into focus. A memory surfaced unbidden. A slammed door, a whispered argument, the sting of tears. The cat brushed against my leg, its purr a physical shove. Fabric ripping. The sound grew louder, closer, as if the room itself were unraveling. My father appeared, his features contorted in a silent rage. The memory of his hand raised in anger flashed before my eyes. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the images, the memories, the suffocating weight of the past, but it was no use. They were woven into the fabric of this place, into the very essence of my being. The cat led me to a central terminal, a monolithic structure of corroded metal and flickering lights. It pulsed with a sickly green glow, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The figures drew closer, their weeping intensifying, their voices rising into a chorus of silent accusation. Fabric ripping. A T-sound was deafening now, a tearing of something fundamental within me. The terminal screen flickered to life, displaying a single line of text, "Subrutin Kowalski," overriding. The words resonated with a chilling finality. The cat's hum reached a fever pitch, vibrating through my entire body. I felt a coldness spreading from my core, a sense of detachment, of being. Overwritten. The shadows coalesced, swirling around me, engulfing me in a suffocating darkness. The figures merged, their faces blurring into a single, monstrous visage. A voice, not my own, echoed in my mind, correction initiated, anomaly contained. The last thing I saw was the cat, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, before the darkness swallowed me whole. The terminal hummed beneath my fingers, a sickly thrum like a dying insect trapped in amber. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of the words I was about to unleash. The air smelled of ozone and something older, something like wet paper left in the dark for decades. The cat, as fur pulsed against my thigh, its resonant hum vibrating through my bones, sharpening the edges of my fury. I am not a memory. Asterisk. The keys clattered under my fingers, each strike sending a ripple through the terminal. Surface, the purple glow bleeding across the water like ink in rain. The sequence *7 to 3 -9 -1 pulsed in my mind. A scar left by the star. I typed it, and the terminal shuddered. The water around me fundi sloshed, not from movement but from the system. As protest, as if the entire chamber were a living thing bracing for impact. The cat, as hum swelled, a deep, mournful funti-oo, that filled the room, pressing against my eardrums, forcing its way into my skull. My vision blurred at the edges, purple, black. The elongated figures of my parents twisting in the reflections, their weeping faces stretched into grotesque grins. The terminal screen flickered. A voice, not from the speakers but from the marrow of my bones, echoed, *, you are the sorrow that builds the prison. *, the words coiled around my throat, strangling me. I wanted to scream, to tear the keys from the board, but my fingers moved of their own accord, typing faster. The clack, clack, of the keys drowning out the cat, as hum for a single fleeting second. The room verdivikt, not with sound, but with light, the purple glow splitting into jagged veins of black, like lightning fracturing glass. The cat, vertinfundend, not with heat, but with a violent, electric glow, its eyes 2 pinpricks of white. Hot fury. The terminal, confirmation tone was a fu-dissonant chime, a sound like a funeral bell tolling backward, and the word subroutine free-flashed across the screen in jagged, bleeding letters. The air crackled eddy, charged with something unstable, something ready to unravel. The walls groaned, not from pressure, but from the strain of holding themselves together, the mortar between the bricks and splintering like dry kindling. The elongated figures in the water twisted there, their limbs elongating further, their faces melting into the cat's reflection, a monstrous, distorted version of itself, weeping in silent fury. The cat's hum cut off abruptly mid-note, leaving only a fussy in its wake, like a fuse burning out. The terminal's glow dimmed. The water fin boiled dead, not from heat, but from the system. S collapse, bubbles rising in slow, grotesque bursts. The cat S fur dimmed to a dull, lifeless grey, and then the wall's fin cracked. Not a single fracture, but 1,000. A web of black veins spidering across the ceiling, the floor, the water itself. The sound was the 40 fabric ripping all over again. But this time, it wasn't the air protesting. It was the world. The walls sin cracked, not a single fracture, but 1,000. A web of black veins spidering across the ceiling, the floor, the water itself. The sound was the fundy fabric ripping, all over again. But this time, it wasn't the air protesting. It was the world. I braced myself, a feral instinct overriding the paralysis that had begun to creep in. The elongated figures in the water, those grotesque reflections of my parents, writhed, their forms less distinct now. Less solid. They weren't simply in the water, they were the water, swirling, coalescing into a single amorphous mass. Free them. The cat's hum demanded. A shriek now, a sonic blade twisting in my skull. The fur pulsed against my thigh, a frantic, electric tremor. Free them? Asterisk, the words were not my own. They were the construct. Bleeding into my consciousness, manipulating my will, fury, a cold, hard stone in my gut, warred with the compulsion. I saw the star sequence 77 to 3 -9 -1 asterisk stiffened, branded onto the back of my eyelids. A memory or a command, I didn't know. The water surged, a black tide threatening to engulf me. The figures within it reached, their fingers elongated and skeletal, brushing against the surface. The rain on the corrugated iron roof above intensified, a frantic foof and rat, a tat-tat echoing the frantic beat of my heart. It wasn't rain, I realized. It was the dissolving of the subroutines, their digital essence being purged. I lunged forward, a desperate, almost animalistic movement, my hand connected with the amorphous mass, and the world twin-shifted, not visually, but structurally. The very architecture of the chamber seemed to bend, to contort around my touch. The cat's hum escalated, a high-pitched whine that threatened to shatter my teeth. It was amplifying something, feeding off my fury, directing it. I felt a surge of power, a terrible, exhilarating release. The figures screamed, not with voices, but with a cascade of digital noise, a chorus of corrupted data. They were resisting, clinging to their existence. Me free them, asterisk, the cat insisted. I didn't want to. I wanted to destroy it all, to erase the memory of the star, the terminal, the cat, the endless, watery archive. But the construct's influence was too strong. With a guttural roar, I ripped. I tore at the massive figures, shattering them, dispersing them into a shower of shimmering black rain. Each dissolution was accompanied by a mournful semping quen, a single echoing note of loss. The rain intensified, a torrential downpour that blurred the edges of the chamber, obscuring the purple light, replacing it with a suffocating shadow black. Then, as abruptly as it began, the rain stopped. The silence was absolute, a vacuum of sound that pressed against my eardrums. The cat's hum ceased, leaving only a faint vibration in my bones. The elongated figures were gone, dissolved into nothingness. The water was still, black and oily, reflecting the fractured ceiling above. The construct's voice, no longer a booming echo but a fragile whisper, slithered into my mind. The loop is still singing. The fabric ripped one last time, a final, mournful tear across the very fabric of reality. The roof tiles were slick with rain that tasted like iron and regret. I didn't fall. I freaked at the crumbling archive. Final groan, a wet tweed crack beneath my boots as the black water surged upwards to meet the collapsing ceiling. My body hit the rain, slicked metal with a jarring fuddy, the cold seeping through my thin jacket, the fudderat, a tatati of the downpour on the corrugated iron. Suddenly the only sound besides my own ragged breaths. The cat was already there, a silent, dark shape beside my sprawled form. Its fur, usually a low thrum against my thigh, was utterly still. No vibration, no hum. Just the heavy, suffocating silence of the shadow black that had replaced the deep purple light. The rain stopped mid-strike, leaving the air thick and cold, smelling of wet stone and ozone. I pushed myself up, fingers digging into the cold, wet metal. The archive was gone, reduced to a swirling vortex of black water and fractured light where the walls had been. Only the cat remained, sitting perfectly still on the rain-slicked roof, its fur absorbing the last vestiges of the purple glow. My mind screamed free, but the echo of the construct's whisper was sharper, for the loop is still singing. Asterisk, not a command. A fact. A cruel, looping truth. I looked up. The sky ripped open by the archive. Collapse revealed the stars. Not scattered, but 20 arranged the same sequence. 7 to 3 -9 -1. A constellation of cold, distant points burning with the same eerie purple light that had bled from the walls. My breath hitched. The bell, a mournful tone, the sound that had echoed with every dissolution in the archive, the sound that had marked the end of the figures. It wasn't just a sound. It was a fuki, the sequence, the fui loop di. The cat shifted. Its fur dark as the void below began to emit a new resonance. Not the low thrum I'd felt before, but a pure, clear note. A single sustained fumen that vibrated in my molars, a frequency that made the raindrops on my skin feel like tiny bells. It was the sound of the bell, the sound of the fui lupid. It wasn't teat amplifying my sorrow anymore. It was sudi becoming fui, the sorrow. The sorrow that was the loop. Amplifier, asterisk, the word slammed into me, cold and sharp. The cat hadn't just been projecting echoes. It had been feeding the construct, using my raw, unprocessed grief, the sorrow of the star, the terminal, the endless watery archive, the loss of my parents as figures in the water figure, to power the broadcast, to keep the loop singing, to keep try my trapped, reliving the dissolution, the rain, the fabric ripping, all to sustain the ancient data stream. My fury, my desperate need to free them, it had been the fuel. The cat's purr had been the engine. I looked at the cat, its fur glowing faintly with the new resonance, the frufum sifum now a physical pressure in the air. The sound was the bell's tone, the sequence, echo, the fabric ripping sound made audible. It matched perfectly. The loop wasn't broken, it was proof complete. The sorrow wasn't a burden I carried. It was the fuddy current powering the broadcast. The cat's fur hummed, a single, pure note vibrating in the sudden, absolute silence of the shadow black. A note that was the bell, the sequence, the fabric tearing one last time, and the sound of my own trapped, endless sorrow. The note held, clear and mournful, as the stars burned their cold, unchanging pattern above.